Good evening, everyone. My name is Joseline Nicholas. I am a realtor. I am also a local real estate investor here in Southern Ontario. One of the reasons why I'm putting these webinars together is because I realize that there's very little content that is very Canadian focused or even Ontario focused. So I myself love learning. So I started by just watching a lot of US content. And while our markets are similar, there's a lot of differences, especially when it comes to the way things operate in specific markets. So I decided to start putting these webinars together to educate people in Ontario or even in Canada in general who are looking to start real estate investing. I started investing about 8 years ago, and we've been doing it on a full-time basis. We even got to a point where I was ready to leave my job. My husband was ready to leave his job, and we both left our employment, and now we're working together in real estate. So that in itself was a milestone, and I'm happy that I can say that tonight because my goal has been to work with other investors who are looking to embark on a similar journey. Even if you're looking to keep your job, however you want to transition and build wealth through real estate, that is what I'm here for. And I believe that's what Farhan is here for as well. So we're here to just talk about the tips and strategies that we've used to grow our portfolio to that point. Tonight, I'm very excited to be hosting a webinar with you, Farhan. Farhan is a real estate investor as well, and he's a mortgage broker as well. How long have you been investing for?
So I bought my first property in 2010, so it's been 11 years now.
Okay. That is
Yeah.
impressive. That is really impressive. And when I look at the things you've achieved in the last 10 years alone, that itself is very impressive. So one of the reasons why I love working with Farhan is because he's not only a mortgage broker, he's also an investor. So I find the majority of the challenges that I would go through as an investor, the majority of the questions that my clients would go through, Farhan has already been through them. So I really appreciate that, and I'm very excited tonight to hear everything that you have to share with us and learn and grow through your experience.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've known Jocelyn now for a few years, and by far one of the most successful real estate investors I know of is Jocelyn. Like, it's just her ability to put deals together and work tirelessly from 7 a.m. to sometime midnight. I have seen her working, and it's just so incredible to see someone who is so passionate. Less about herself and more about her clients. I've seen her fight about her clients day in, day out for weeks and months sometime. And a lot of time, it's a very tireless job. And I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. The goal here is to go over some basic ideas of multifamily homes. And to make it clear what we are covering today, we can spend weeks and weeks covering this topic. What we are covering today is more duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes. Anything more than that, it's a very different criteria of looking at those. So we will do a webinar in future, me and Jocelyn, where we will go over buildings with more than 4 units and how to finance them, how to buy them, what are some of the best practices in that area. But today the goal is really to cover duplexes and triplexes and some fourplexes. My first experience with the duplex came in a very crazy form. I bought a property, it was on the south end of Guelph, detached home. Back at that time, it was $360,000. And it had a walkout basement apartment. So I approached the city and I wanted to create a legal basement apartment. And for next one year, I went through hell. It was and one of the most stupid reason was I was a third-year university student, had no idea how to do it, but I wanted to do it on my own. I wanted to make a lot of all the go through the process myself and learn how it can be done more effectively. So that was my first ever multifamily property. And what on that time ended up happening is that I had rented out upstairs for $1,600, and the basement, legal 2-bedroom basement apartment, was rented out for $1,200. For a $360,000 property, the cash flow which on that time it generated was unbelievable. And what did end up happening was, in a couple of years, one of the investors approached me who was a neighbor in that area, and he offered me 599 for it. So I walked away from it. For a little while, me and my family, we lived upstairs and we had that property rented out. But that was my first experience. And from there, between me, my friends, my family, we have had about close to 30 to 40 different multifamily homes, which we have not only I have had a chance to finance them, but also to maintain them, manage them. Also, a lot of time getting them converted into a triplex status or a duplex status. So I have been through that end of it quite a bit. One of my goals today is not to go into a lot of details and stay really on the side of on how to finance them and cover up a lot of questions which we have gotten so far. I'm not going to be able to cover up everything, but I will try to cover as many as possible questions. I'm going to pass it on to you, Joseline. Knowing your portfolio, I know you have pretty much everything you own is a multi-family home. So what was your first experience? How did you got into it? And what has been good and what has been not so good? Have you had any bad experience with it? If you can share your knowledge with us.
So I'm going to start by saying I love multifamily. In fact, for me, unless it's my primary residence, I don't buy anything that's not multifamily unless I see an opportunity to be able to convert it. If there's no opportunity to convert and it's not my primary residence, I don't want to own something that's single family home. And the reason for that is I learned pretty quickly when I started investing that single family homes are meant for dwelling. And I could be wrong, but the truth is single family homes are meant for people to live there. I find that with multifamily, you have the ability to be able to collect multiple checks from multiple families. So there's just so many benefits with working with multifamily. Our first encounter with multifamily was when we bought our first property. Now, we didn't know what we were doing, but we just thought it was a good idea to get something that has a basement apartment. And that was the first property we ever bought in Toronto. After seeing how good things were with that property, we decided that we want a second one. We want something that has, 2 units or 3 units. And since then, we've never owned anything that has only one single unit. Even in other cases, sometimes in homes that we've lived in, we would look at something that has a basement apartment so that we can live upstairs and rent the basement. I think the idea of being able to collect rents from 2 families versus 1 family, because I feel like there's a ceiling to rent. It's really hard to justify $3,000 of rent to 1 family, right? Unless that family is wealthy and they're in a different bracket. But it's easy to collect $2,500 on the main floor and $1,500 in the basement, so you have $4,000. So it's things like that that I was just so attracted to, and that's why for me, unless it has 2+ units, I'm not gonna buy it, or unless if I can modify it to make it that.
Makes perfect sense. Have you had any negative experience with multifamily?
No, not at all. Actually, to be honest, we've never had any negative experience with real estate investing altogether. Luckily, we've never had any problems with tenants, and we're just so thankful that it's been like that. But for the last 8 years, we've never had any problems whatsoever. And I'm very thankful for that.
And one of the main reason I believe for that is, Joseline, I see how much due diligence you and Pascal does in terms of finding good tenants. All those positives you're talking about do exist, but there is also shortfalls of it. Like, to share a quick scenario, we had a property very close to McMaster University. It was a triplex. One of the tenants stopped paying, and then he started doing a lot of activities which start bothering the other 2 tenants, and the other 2 tenants stopped paying. So it's a very ripple effect which does sometimes go over. So that's why this is an area which I do not recommend first-time home buyers or people who have very little cash flows to get into, because they do bring a lot of profitability, but if they do go wrong multifamily, it can go very wrong and very quickly. And I have seen that firsthand few times now, where unfortunately the basement tenants start having problem, and They made sure the upstairs tenant leave, and then they would not let the landlord rent out the upstairs tenant. And that's the next topic I really want to go into, is making sure that you do hire a professional property manager to rent out your multifamily units. A lot of time, and just because most of the people, they are good people and they have good heart, and they see someone in trouble and they do want to help them, but they do get bitten quite a bit. Jocelyn, have you seen people going through that stuff as well, or not yet?
Yeah, I've seen horror stories for sure. They do happen. And, most of what I've been telling, my clients is just proper screening. And while that might not eliminate 100% of the problem, but at least maybe it might reduce the risk of getting into such problems. So yeah, I've seen those issues.
Yes, and
Yeah.
that's from financial point of view, one of the thing which when I'm financing multifamily properties, one of the thing I do recommend my investors is make sure you do have 3 to 6 months of mortgage payment and property taxes tucked away, that in case if your tenant doesn't pay, you do have the ability to pay without you start taking money from credit cards or going default on your mortgage and so on and so forth. One of the area I do want to highlight is that there is a lot of people when they are looking to get into their who own a home and they want to get into a next property which has a basement apartment. If you do have a legal basement apartment, there is a lot of lenders who will use up to 100% of the rental income from the basement in towards your, that gets added in your monthly income. So if you have an ability to buy a $600,000 home and there is a legal basement apartment in it, your affordability goes up to $750,000. Now, it does depend case after case. All of those things do come into effect, but having an basement apartment does help you financially quite a lot in getting into a property. Jocelyn, if you don't mind, I want to go over what you and your husband did. It's about a year and a half since then. You guys had one big single family, huge home, and you guys bought a property which had a legal basement apartment. How was that transition? How you guys are coping with it? How's your experience been so far?
I think it's probably one of the best decisions we've ever made. And I'm saying that because selling this one big, beautiful property allowed us to buy a few more. So we did downsize a bit, but then we also moved into a home that is comfortable. It's not too small, it's 2,000 square feet. Before we had like 4,000. Who needs 4,000 square feet? But, I think it's also bittersweet because, you get used to this lifestyle and then you downsize. But I think that was a much better decision because with what just happened with COVID, all of our properties that we bought appreciated so much more that our capital, whatever we had put in, probably has multiplied a few times. So it was probably a very good decision.
Absolutely. Now, in terms of cash flow wise, how you have experienced that now you're in a property where you have a legal basement apartment, how much does that help your cash flows on monthly basis?
So in this property, so in terms of cash flow, the property that we live in right now, the tenant who's downstairs, they pay about $1,400, and that just goes towards our expenses for the house. But with other properties that we own that are multifamily, one of them that is in Niagara, for example, we get about $4,750, and the purchase price for that one was about $680. So our mortgage and our other expenses are probably close to $3,000, and we have a good, close to $1,000 of cash flow. So that is really good. And I'm seeing that even with my clients included, on average, my clients, myself included, you're cash flowing at least $300 to $400 per unit. If you have 3 units, you have more cash flow. 2 units, slightly less, but on average, about $300 to $400 per unit.
And that's another area I want to go into, Jocelyn, while you're going into it. Now, Niagara property is fairly far from your home. It's good 2 hour drive. How do you manage it?
That's a very good question. So, frankly speaking, right now, we manage that ourselves. We have very, very good tenants, very, very good tenants who sometimes take care of the property. We've made a deal with some of the tenants who help with grass cutting and things like that. But I think that the key, honestly, the number one thing is just tenant selection. Because our tenants in Niagara are amazing and we don't have to worry about it. We do delegate a lot of work, even with other properties, we delegate things to professionals. So if there's a plumbing problem, we'll just find a plumber who can go and do it. If there's electrical problem, we'll find an electrician. So we don't try to do things ourselves. What we do is more like oversight. Yeah.
Makes perfect sense. Now, I would like to go into a bit of a scenario to share one of my client's story. One of my client, he bought a property which was a single family detached home, but it was on a big lot. So right after buying it, he rented out the main unit of the home and went to the city to add an addition on the side as well as on the back. So he converted a single family home into a triplex. His purchase price originally was $550,000. His renovation cost of putting an addition on the back and on the side was about $150,000. So his net expense was $700,000. Once those additions were done, what we did was we refinanced his home one more time, and he was able, his property appraised over $900,000. We were able to put a $700,000 mortgage on it, and still on top of it, he has more than $1,000 positive cash flow. So none of his cash is involved, but it still generates over $1,000 positive cash flow. Now, these things don't happen every day, and that's where professional realtors such as Joseline's do come in very, very, very handy to find stuff like that. And most of these deals, what at least from my experience I have seen, they happen off the market, especially when you have a tenants in a property. Not a lot of investors want to take it to the market because it's a hassle of giving notices to the tenant, going through the viewings, everything. They would rather take a haircut on it of $10,000 to $15,000 and sell it off the market and not worry about this process being complicated for them. Joseline, in your experience, I have financed quite a bit of your clients' rental properties as well as your rental properties. How do you find deals like that?
That is a very good question, Farhan. So there's a mix between on-market properties and off-market properties. While we find a few properties on market, like on MLS, a lot of them we find off-market. And the way we find them is simply just knowing people, having conversation. With the way the market has been in the last few months, it was very hard to find a good deal on the market. I'm not saying it's impossible, because I know both you and I included, we do find some amazing deal on MLS that maybe other people haven't seen or, can't quite read, but there's also another source of deals, which is just off market. So it's basically a mix of those two. And I'm going to say this, I think this is a perfect place to say it. We do have a few off-market opportunities coming up in the multifamily arena. We probably have maybe close to 5 properties that are coming to market in the next 6 months. And so if anybody is interested or wants to know more about that, please reach out and we'll be happy to provide the details.
Now, converting properties into multifamily, now it seems like, a very complicated process, but Joseline, I know you have been through it a few times. How complicated it is, and what has been your experience with them so far?
I really love it. I think that it is not complicated at all. To be honest with you, I think the key is just working with the right people. So what I do is we don't cut any corners, and you know this. Like, we will find proper people to do proper work. So we have a contractor who will work with an engineer. The engineer will do the drawings, submit to the city. Everything is done properly. So in this case, other than my expertise of finding the property, knowing what's possible with the property, then I hand it over to professionals, the engineer who's going to do all the drawings, submit to the city, and the contractor who's going to do all the work. So it's literally the way I'm saying it. To me, it looks like such a simple process, because all I have to do is bring them the property and they'll do all the work. I do oversee the work, make sure that the numbers make sense, make sure the timelines are on point, but that is not much of a big deal as I once imagined. Because before we started getting into this, I used to think it was such a big task. But once you have the right people in the right places, it is actually not that complicated. What's your experience? Because I know you've done a lot of these as well.
To be honest with you, it's been really positive so far. Do you hit some hiccups? Absolutely. Sometimes you get a really good inspector who actually walks you through the process. And sometimes if you get unlucky and you get a bad inspector from city, it can make your life hell, like everything else. But what I have seen is with myself, with a lot of my investors, is uh, you don't take a look into the property what it is right now. You always see it as what it can be. And I have a lot of friends who have very good incomes, but they have very little or no down payments. And what I have always recommended them is purchase plus improvement programs, right? Where you do, let's say if you buy a single family detached home for $600,000, you do 10% down payment, and you want to put a legal basement apartment, which is going to cost you $60,000. Bank will finance 90% of it in the purchase plus improvement program. So all you really need to have is total of $66,000. No, sorry, yeah, $66,000, and that would get you into a property where you can live upstairs and rent out the basement apartment and go accordingly. Also, let's say you do own your home and you are looking to buy a multifamily home. If that rental property can support the mortgage payment, the property taxes, and so on, not the A banks, but alternative lenders, they will take 100% of the rental income and add that in your income and finance that property. There's a lot of those programs available. And the biggest challenge I see, especially when I'm talking to investors, they have this mindset that if the bank turns me down, I have no other option, and that's definitely not true. There is plenty of other options, and there is always plans we can put in effect for you where you might not be able to go to a big bank right now, but if you follow these guidelines in a year or 2 or 3 years, you are able to go there and temporarily go to an alternative lender and have them finance this multifamily home for you. In terms of uh, financing, what is the challenge you have seen yourself, Jocelyn, as well as your investors? Where do you see biggest problem?
That is, so in terms of ourselves with our own portfolio, I know we've run into problems where, the big banks, the A lenders will say, okay, maybe you have more properties than we would like to lend to. So we've had to go to B lenders.
Mm-hmm.
So that has been our experience. However, the way I look at it is that we have to, obviously, when we go to B lenders, we end up paying a higher rate, but we calculate that as part of our expenses. So if I have a higher rate, let's say instead of having 1.5, which is the typical rate today, if you go to an A lender, we end up with 3 or even 3.5. All I have to do is make sure that I still have my cash flow, even after accounting for the higher rate that I have to pay. And in most cases, that will be the case. So long as it's part of my calculation, I have no problem with that.
Makes perfect sense. How has been your experience dealing with the cities in terms of converting a single family home into a duplex or a triplex? I know you have had a lot of experience in that area. How has that been so far?
You know what? Like as you say, like the cities are very strict. They know what they want you to do. So we've had, some situations where the city is not so straight. They want us to do things certain way. What I like though is that it's also very predictable. So we've been able to just do what the city wants, right? Sometimes we'll push back here and there, we'll go back and forth. But what I found is if we just do what the city wants, usually we'll just have our way.
Makes sense. Another thing I want to get into is the tiny homes. A lot of municipalities, including Kitchener-Waterloo, is allowing, if you have a big backyard, they will allow you to put another dwelling in your backyard, another tiny home, another apartment. Also, what I have seen a lot of time is if you do have not an attached garage, but a detached garage, a lot of people convert that garage into a 2-story garage and put a 1-bedroom legal basement apartment in it. Sounds very complicated, but it really isn't. And the benefit of having those properties where you have a detached garage with it and have a single 1-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment on top of your garage, it's not part of your home, so it does not really impact your living ability. And yet you're able to collect some very, very nice rent from that unit. Another thing I have seen a lot of people do is creating, uh, generally most of the homes in Kitchener, Waterloo, Cambridge, Guelph, in southwestern Ontario, their lots, they are not very wide, but they are much deep. And people are able to do an extension in the back and create another 1 or 2-bedroom apartment in the back and use that towards creating rental income. And that's again going back to the whole idea is that having someone professional on your side truly makes a difference, because they can guide you through into getting into a property where you can create a lot of income in future, even though there is not a lot of income coming in right now. Another thing I have seen with a lot of my investors is sometimes they buy property and it's cash flow negative, and a lot of people get discouraged from it and they don't go for it. But you have to take a look into long-term vision of the property, right? What the rents were 5 years ago, today the rents are almost double. So if you could sustain, let's say, $200 negative cash flow for the next 2 years, that's $5,000. And that's nothing in real estate investing. But by that time, your mortgage payment is going to remain exactly the same, but the rental income is going to start climbing up. And that would allow you to have a positive cash flow in your multifamily homes. I want to go into a bit more details about a lot of people, especially to us mortgage broker, they reach out and they ask a question: can I do this with no down payment or very little down payment? And from my experience, no, you can't. You need to have 20-25% down payment if you want to buy multifamily homes. If you're a first-time home buyer and your goal is just to live upstairs and have a basement apartment, that's a very different story. But generally speaking, uh, daily, at least every day, I get 3 to 4 calls. Oh, I want to buy a home, but I have no down payment. And my answer is simply no, you're wasting your time at the moment. It's just not feasible with all the regulations in place for you to do that. What do you see, Joseline, as do you see a lot of investors who want to come in and they don't want to actually invest any money?
Yes, that is absolutely true. And I think some of it comes from there's a lot of talks about buying properties with no money down. And I think that a lot of the times also a misconception. There's a certain way of structuring those deals, and it usually involves partners. But yes, I do get questions like that. In fact, we have a few questions today that some of them actually will have to do with, how can I buy a property with no down payment? And I'm glad that you've answered that no, you can't unless you have a partner who's bringing in down payment. Otherwise, there's no lender who's going to finance 100% of the deal.
Yeah.
So that one is answered.
And that's another area I want a lot of our participants to think about it is there is people who have great incomes but have no down payment. And there is people who have a lot of money lying around, but they don't have any income. And a lot of time what you need to do is just group together and buy something together. And in few years, the person who does not have a lot of down payment will have the money which will come from the appreciation of the property, and the person who did not have income would likely have some sort of income, and they can utilize and go their separate ways. I have seen quite a bit of those partnerships, and they work quite effectively. As long as they're structured professionally and they are done effectively, there is no problem. Another thing I have seen is people creating corporations and buying multifamily homes in them. And that also works out extremely well because you have the ability to have shares of the corporation, which do give you an extra layer of protection, but it also allows multiple partners to come in and buy a property together. Joseline, I know you are going into that direction now. How's your experience been with people, especially who own properties in corporation names?
So that's a good question. I'm gonna tie it in with another question that we got here saying, why did we choose to buy properties in corporations, especially for doing private lending? Our decision to do corporations actually had so much to do with rental income, because like once you have like multiple properties and you have all this income coming in a personal name, like that, the way you're paying your taxes and things like that. So we had to consult with our accountant. And I think maybe that would be a good starting point to speak with your accountant, look at your specific situation and look at your income. So for us, it was more an income situation where we have so much income coming into our names through the other properties that we own. We have to reduce that by going into corporations. One way of doing it. I'm not saying it's right for everyone, but for us, the accountant did say that that was the correct choice for us at this point.
Yeah, and your scenario could be very different. I have a lot of clients of mine who buy properties under corporation name just purely for liability purposes. They don't want their name to be involved. I have clients who are celebrities and they don't want, that tenant seeing the name and taking advantage of it. YouTubers, all sorts of people, even people with influence, politicians and so on. A lot of them buying property under their name is just not the wise thing. And that's where, again, you need to have a conversation with your lawyer and your accountant. If you do want to build a big real estate investment business, few people you need to have on your corner. You do need to have a very, very good realtor, someone like Joseline, who can assist you with the process. You do need to have a very good lawyer in place that you can call and take advice from. And honestly, that's the best. The money which I spent on my legal advice is probably one of the best investment I make, because it saves me from so much more headache. And I know same thing applies with you, Joseline. You need to have a proper chartered accountant, someone who can do the accounting the right way. And there has to be a broker involved who understands that, not only from the point of view of financing it, but also has been through the experience of buying these properties themselves, so they can kind of correct some kind of pitfalls you see. And me and Joseline, we have these conversations when a client comes in all the time, and a lot of time we tell them, buying a multifamily property is just not the right option for you, depending on where your finances are or where your family life is or so on. It's not the right choice. And then there is people which we kind of push them into buying multifamily because it's such a good fit for them. And that basically I want to lead into next section of our conversation is, let's say if there is a normal family who owns one home, that's owner occupied home. They've been in it for a little bit. They have some money sitting aside. How would you recommend them to get into their first multifamily property, Joseline?
So usually, I would look at different situations, something like, do they want to stay in their home or do they want to move? If it makes more sense for them to stay in their home, then usually my recommendation, which I feel is also going to be your recommendation because this is what we do, we usually would recommend refinance the home that they live in, stay there if they want to stay there, and now they can use that equity to buy another home.
And Joseline, I have seen a lot of people going through that process where people buy one property, and that's generally the starting point, and then they start adding a lot more properties. But taking that first step of faith of getting into something like an investment property takes a lot of effort, and especially for people who are, not familiar with real estate investment, it is a big step. Any other recommendation you would have for them in order to make this step more easier for them?
I think for sure do have these conversations. I think that the moment I started speaking to professionals, and when I say have these conversations, I think know who you're listening to. The moment I started listening to the right people, for example, Farhan, even the time we met you and you started looking at our financial situation and recommending, based on a mortgage broker perspective, this is what you should do. our portfolio has gone up so much because we speak the same language almost. But if I had gone to another mortgage broker who's not an investor themselves, then they start telling me, oh, lenders don't like this, you're gonna get in trouble. They give me advice based on their reality. But if your goals align with building a portfolio, speak to people who are building portfolios. A lot of the times, if I know where I'm going, in order to get there faster, I just find people who've been there already, and they literally cut my learning curve in half.
And Jocelyn, that this has happened to me so many times. One of the big benefit of being in my industry is you get to see what people are doing, and you get to see what people are doing successfully. And you also get to see there is a lot of people who have a lot of advice, amazing, wonderful, really life-changing advice. However, their goals are not aligned with what I'm looking to do. And what I have seen is I have started to follow the people who I saw who have taken the slow road. There is no shortcut, a big scenario that, one big break is gonna come. What generally I have seen people who have built big real estate portfolios, they do it slowly over time, effectively. Um, I have clients I have seen where we have set up goals with them that you're going to buy 1 to 2 real estate investments each year. They have fairly high incomes, but they live like broke college students just so they can build that portfolio. And once they build that portfolio, then they can have some of the nicer things coming into their life. And that's the next conversation I want to go into is personal cash flow. And I know it's not very much related with multifamily, but in my opinion, it's 100% related with it. It's if you really are serious about building a good real estate portfolio, your personal cash flow habits have to be right on the par. I still remember very clearly first time I met with Jocelyn and we were having a discussion, and the mindset she was in and how much excitement she was in, and whatever I on that time we kind of made a plan. It was not my plan or her plan, it was kind of a mixture. She went and just did it, and the results they start pouring in very, very quickly. From in the last 3 4 years, she has taken her real estate portfolio to a level which is unbelievable. And that's what I see as the biggest success of her, is that she's connected with so many successful investors that she's avoiding a lot of those pitfalls, which people like me or some of the people we talk to, we have been through. um, in terms of cash flow habits, Jocelyn, I have seen you making very little income and having the same kind of a mindset, and making a lot of income and having same kind of habits. Do you want to shed some light on it, on how do you maintain that strictness in your lifestyle as well as in your cash flow habits, and how do you counter that?
I think that, to be honest with you, I think it's just the people that surround me. Like if I'm spending time with people who are just so humble, and you're right, like I think there's a rule that says you become like the 5 people you hang out with. So because the people that I hang around, like including yourself and other of our friends who are just living really simply, regardless of what income they have, and they're not sad about it. It's just the choice, the lifestyle they've chosen. And it's not like you're restricting yourself, because whatever you want, you can have. You choose not to have it, right? So I think a lot of the times it just comes from just the culture around me, and not feeling like I'm missing out, but feeling like this is a choice we've made. And I know if I wanted something more expensive, I can have it, but I choose not to.
And how do you, like with myself, one of the thing which me and my family we take quite a pride in is that our expenses, they're exactly the same for the last 5 years. If you add inflation, there is nothing changed. It's very, very strict on basic things. And it's not that we are depriving our children from living this lifestyle. It's just I have seen the value of having a really good budget and following it, having a really good plan and just following it. It brings in so much more peace of mind. And it's amazing to kind of install the same habits into my children's earlier on, where like if they're buying a toy, I want to make sure they donate one of the old toy to make sure they know the value of it. They know that, how much their dad has to work hard to earn money to get that toy. Same thing applies in properties. I keep on going back to this idea that don't look at the something which is shiny and jump all over it. Look at what it could be. Uh, the house which you bought, Jocelyn, the one you live in, I remember very clearly looking at it and I'm like, oh my God, how she's gonna go from a very beautiful home into this home. But a year into it, and you had renovated to that home to a point where it looks like $1 million home.
Yeah.
It probably is now worth that much money. But how was that transition for yourself as well as getting to that point of looking at the future value of something instead of the current value of something?
Yeah, I think this is a skill that I came with more experience. The more experience that became, the more I learned that these shiny objects are just that, and that the real diamond is in the rough. So it was a little bit of an adjustment. And I think to circle back to your previous question about like how do we manage to just have a simple life. I think for me, another thing that really drives me is the goals that we have. We have very, very ambitious goals, and there's a little bit in me personality that's very goal oriented. So I know I have these goals. I have, you know, very, very ambitious goals to get to. So until I get to those goals, I have the discipline to get there. And once I get there, maybe I will change my habits. I don't know. I hope not. But just having the discipline to get to my goal.
No. No. And knowing your family and how humbly you live, it's absolutely an honor. One of the things which was a common question when I was going through is people who own 2 or 3 properties. They feel like they are at their ceiling and
Hmm.
they are unable to find further properties. What recommendation or advice we have for them? Um, yes, it's difficult. Buying your first home is fairly easy. Buying your second home is not that difficult. Buying your third home is gets a little bit difficult. But when you start getting to fourth, fifth, it's a challenge. It's a little bit of a process, and that's where again this is more of a one-on-one discussion. Okay, where we need to analyze financially where you stand, kind of come up with a financial plan on getting to that stage. What I had to do going from third to fourth home for myself was that I sold one of my property and I took the down payment from it and divided that into 3 different layers. And that's how I sacrificed one and I was able to get to three, four, five. That was my personal story of doing it that way. That might be the route for you. Or like I have a very good client of mine, and what he has done is he had to take a second mortgage on one of his property to go over that hump and buy the next property. I have also investors who had to go into a little bit of a higher risk lenders and get a little bit higher interest rate to get into the next property. But because their initial properties were making so much positive cash flow that wasn't a big challenge and they were able to get into. Um, there is no limit in terms of how many properties you buy. That's a very big misconception in the market that, once you get to 5 properties or you get to 10 properties, nobody's going to finance you. Big banks are not going to finance you. That's reality. But there are lenders who will finance 16 houses. There is lenders who will finance 20 homes. There is ones which even do more than that. I have multiple clients who own 10 plus properties, and there is not a lot of difficulty financing that. The challenge lies is, especially from financing point of view, there is not a lot of mortgage brokers who are willing to do that much work. Just to illustrate, financing first home or generally second home is a very, very simple process. But when somebody has 10 rental properties, the amount of paperwork which is involved, the amount of effort which is involved for the reward for a mortgage broker, it's not worth their time. So lot of those mortgage agents and brokers, they decide to walk away from those clients because it's not worth the headache of going through these many rentals, putting all the paperwork together, and finding the right solution for it. But that's what we do specialize in. So if somebody is in that situation where they do have a lot of rentals and they are stuck, I would highly recommend them to reach out to Joseline, and because she manages a lot of them, and reach out to me as well, and I'll be happy to assist in that area. People who own multiple properties, Joseline, what's your advice for those people?
I think that what you say is definitely accurate. Connect with professionals, in this case yourself. I think one thing you say to me that I think changed the way we think is, if we structure the deals correctly and we always have the down payment, you'll always get me financing. So I know my job is to find the down payment, and then I'll bring it to you. And if the deal is structured correctly, and I must say, Farhan, that for sure we have to make the right purchases. Because, for example, we know some of our clients who've gone and bought like really expensive single family homes or new builds, and then that eats into their ability to the purchasing power. But if we're buying the correct properties and we're structuring this deal such that we can buy a next one, we structure this deal such that we can buy the next one, it becomes a much different conversation.
We are getting to the end of it, Joseline. So I'm just going to share an example of one of the young kids who came into my office 3 years ago. He was 21, and he really wanted to invest into real estate. He had very good job and was making decent amount of money. And his family owned quite a bit of property. So it was not that this guy did not have background into it, but it's just he wanted to do it. And this fellow today owns close to 15 homes at the age of 24. And what I saw him do, at least in the beginning, was that he went and he came to my office and he's like, hey, I want to buy my first rental property. How should I do it, right? And my plan was with him very simple, straightforward: pay off your student loan. Okay, live in your mom's basement apartment and save as much money as possible so you can get to 20% down payment and buy your first property. 4 months later, he came back. He found a property in Windsor, which was like $110,000, and he had 20% down payment for it. I told him, okay, great, save another 20% and come and see me after. 3-4 months later, he bought another one. And then slowly those properties start going up in value. So we created a plan where he sold 1 or 2 of them and bought a bunch more. I have seen people go from nothing to 15, 16, 17 properties in a very little period, but it requires a lot of discipline, hard work, and sacrifice, which not a lot of people are willing to make. And that's where I have seen challenges that if you ask people, everybody want to own these multifamily homes, but the sacrifice and the discipline which is required to own them, most of the people do not have them. And it's not a quick process. As I keep on bringing this point onto it, each person's situation is unique. I wish there was uniform one state formula. It's not. And that's where you need to rely on professionals to assist you with it.
Absolutely.
Any final thoughts about that, Joseline?
So I'm just scanning through some of the questions that are coming through, but I think that yes, you're absolutely right. The key is to definitely be focused, have a plan. One thing you've said repeatedly is you come up with a plan. And I think that once you have a plan and you strategize and you know where you're going, it becomes so much easier. And a lot of people do focus on the 20%, like how do I find the 20%? But when you have a plan, that becomes much easier as well.
100%.
Yeah.
And
so we have a few questions.
Sorry, go ahead.
That have come in.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are very very specific to a situation. So with those people whose questions are very, very specific, I will connect with you and answer them one-on-one. For example, I have somebody who's asking if I know a property manager in Hamilton. Yes, we do have property manager in Hamilton, so I'll connect with you and recommend that. I have one question here that I think you should address? And that question is, I think I could talk about this too, but I think I want to hear your answer as well. It's in your duplexes or multifamily properties that you have, how do you separate hydro or like other bills like water that can be separated? I know hydro can be separated, but how do you deal with water?
So there is sub-metering companies out there, which basically from water line which is coming in, they install this small sub-metering device and then bill each one of the tenant for their use. It's a couple of $1,000 investments, but honestly, it's well worth it. I have uh, done that myself with few of my properties, and it's absolutely worth it because then tenant does not feel like they're paying for other tenants' utilities. Very simple, very straightforward. If somebody needs assistance with that, reach out to me. I'll share those company's information. There's different ones in Guelph. Those ones do not operate in Hamilton. There is ones in Hamilton which do not operate in Guelph. So it really depends where your property is located.
Awesome. I really love hearing that. So let me see a few more questions that we have here that I think you could cover. What key factors should one keep in mind when selecting tenants for long distance investing?
It's a great question. This is what I look for, okay, and I have had very good success with it, is more than the paper of the credit bureau, job letter, pay stub. I want to hear their story, okay. By far the best tenant I have had to date. This guy approached me and he's like, hey, listen, I'm going through a bankruptcy. I just had a divorce and I just want a place where I can put my kids in and they are safe. But he had a very long-term job. He had never ever missed his mortgage payment. Yes, he went through a bankruptcy because he was in a very bad relationship and he had to go through it. So on paper, he looked like the worst tenant ever. He stayed in one of my homes for 5 years and he's a very good friend of mine now and so on. But I saw how much potential that has. The personal stories to me mean a lot more than what it says on the paper.
Yeah.
That's my way of looking at it. But again, professional property manager, their services, they're worth in gold. A lot of people don't value how valuable they are because they're trained to figure out who is a good tenant and who is not a good tenant. And it makes such a big difference. And not to put Joseline realtors down, but a lot of time people just use a realtor to list their home on MLS and choose a tenant that way. In my opinion, that's not the best method to do it. Okay, your goal should be to hire a professional property manager who can vet the tenants as good as realtors are at their job in terms of finding properties. They are not very good um, vetting people who they don't know who is gonna be whom, right? You should absolutely invest the money into hiring a professional or vetting the tenant and going accordingly.
Yeah, especially if you're using the realtor who has no properties themselves. They've never vetted a tenant before, so they have no system also. So I totally agree with you for sure. I would rather go with a property manager than a realtor.
Yeah. Sharing my
Another last
personal.
question that I think you touched upon
Mhm.
not so long ago, but I want you to answer this one because it's very specific. For somebody who's young, single guy, they're making a moderate income, what would you recommend? Where would you recommend they start? Say they're making about 60,000 a year. Where would you recommend they start in terms of real estate investing?
Go into towns where the property values are low and start buying there. One of the good thing about being young is generally you have quite a bit of time on your hand, which as you get older, and just Jocelyn, you can attest to that, and you have kids, the time you don't have that anymore, right? Look, if you're young, the goal should be to invest more time learning than anything else. So align yourself with the right people, right mentors. Whatever I am today, in terms of my success in real estate, it has 99% to do with my teachers, my mentors, my coaches who have taught me all these things, and my association with people like Joseline and other people. 1% I would say is my effort. That's about it. And that's what I would recommend. If you are young today, you are making a moderate income, go and sit down with someone who has done it the right way. Not those people who generally have these flashy cars and this quick story that within 1 year I made this much income. Uh, no disrespect to them, but I'm not a big fan of those. The long road is where I would recommend you spend your time on.
Absolutely. And I think another thing that also young people have that I find when you have a family you don't have, I think as a young person, you have the ability to live really cheaply, right? Like when we were young, before we had kids, we didn't even mind. We had properties, but we lived in basements, right? We would just, rent out somebody else's basement, in fact, not even our own properties, right? And I feel like when you're young like that, you have the ability to reduce your expenses. But when you have a family of, 3 kids, 2 kids, it's really hard to reduce those expenses. You still can, but when you're younger, it's much easier. You have more flexibility. So for sure, like even reducing your expenses, as Farhan said, pay off some of your debt and start saving maybe for your first property.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow, it is 7 o'clock. Farhan, I really appreciate having you here, and I am very thankful for you being here, sharing your experience, and just having this conversation to educate people, to help people here in Ontario. And what I love about what we're doing is we're here in Ontario, right? So we can actually talk about things that are Ontario specific. So thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate every minute, everything you said. I feel like every time I speak to you, I learn something new. So
I feel the completely same way, Joseline. Every time I have a conversation with you, it just brings me so much energy and it brings me so much more excitement because, and that's another thing I love about you, Joseline. You always have good news. I don't know why, but every time I speak with you, there is a big smile and there is some good news. There is something really, really good and positive and productive happening. So thank you for giving me this opportunity, and it's an absolutely honor speaking with people and as well as you and learning from you.
Thank you, Farhan. Thank you as well for our attendees. I personally hope that tonight was somehow career changing. And when I say career changing, I talk about your career as a real estate investor. If you have any questions, do reach out to us. We'll send out an email with contact information and a link to book a one-on-one consultation if you'd like. And we hope that we can add value to your real estate investing career. Thank you again for being here. Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.